Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to the Space Madness Podcast. This is your host, Jeff Nasanov. Today we have with us the former chief scientist of NASA, Dr. Jim Green, and I'm excited to have him on. He was one of the legendary people I first heard about at JPL because we were writing stuff for him and his team to review. So it's been nice to chat with him over the years here and there, and of course to have him on today. So Jim, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much, Jeff. I'm always delighted to talk about what's happened in the past on NASA, what's currently going on today, and kind of project, a fabulous future of space exploration ahead of us. Absolutely.
So Jim is retired from NASA, but has been very active writing books, and I'm sure we'll talk about all of that. And it's a path I hope to pursue myself someday. I don't think I'll ever get bored of trying to share the joy and the excitement of space exploration. So
good.
But what I like to do on this podcast is I like to tell the stories of individual people, and that really starts as far back as they can remember. So to kick it off, I'd just like to hear from you. When did an interest in space start for you? When did it become clear that this is what you had to do, period?
Well, it actually is pretty easy to describe because I was born in 1951. Okay. So I was 6 or 7 years old when Sputnik was running around, and although I didn't see it, the parents talked about it, people were talking about it, new era of space, and I born and raised in a small town in Iowa, Burlington, Iowa, right on the Mississippi. Where you could go out at night and see the beautiful sky that you can't see from the city lights in larger cities. And by the time I got into high school, I had an opportunity to work at an observatory, Okay, so the high school had a 12-inch Alvin Clark refractor, right?
Okay.
And the chemistry teacher, and I was taking chemistry at the time when that happened, ended up being the director of the observatory. They gave him the keys. He went up to the University of Iowa one summer and took a class in astronomy and came back to the high school and then declared, I'm going to teach a course in astronomy. But the high school wouldn't let him teach it during the school day, so he taught it after school. And about 20 of us took it. And a significant number of that group began using the telescope. All right. Now, this is in the late 60s, so this also is in the era of Apollo. This is also in the era of a lot of news coming out, missions all the time. I'm surrounded and bombarded by what's happening in the news for humans going to the moon. But not only that, in 66 was the first episode of Star Trek. And so I began watching it from the very first episode. All right. So that's the environment. My environment was surrounded by space news, surrounded by the idea of humans going to the moon, having the opportunity to build instruments for the 12-inch Alvin Clark refractor, take images, figure out and learn how to develop those negatives, print, and then send them in and actually get published in Sky and Telescope, a number of images that I took. And I'm in high school.
Yeah. Wow. There's so many things I want to explore there already. I mean, just what can you? I would love to hear your memory of a child's perspective on Sputnik, because we usually hear about it in historical or certainly military and so on. But how did you perceive that as a 6-year-old?
Well, of course, when I'm young, in grade school, etc., I loved play. I loved Army. I loved, I was a boy's boy, maybe you could say that, and played football and rough and tough stuff. And so the parents would talk about it. The teachers might mention it. So it was there, but it wasn't my world. My world was play.
Sure.
Okay. So, and I wasn't particularly great in as I remember in grade school. I wasn't a top student, doing, miraculous things. I was kind of an average student. I'd get in trouble and I'd be in the principal's office every once in a while, being yelled and screamed at, standing behind his desk, like this, and you will not do this anymore, that kind of stuff. No fighting on the playground. So, but as I grew up and I got into high school, I began to develop several really good things. I was really good in math. My brother was fantastic in math. In fact, he went on and got his degrees and taught mathematics at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He retired many years ago, but he was going, even in high school, he was taking the community college courses in math because he passed everything in high school already. And I had that ability too. I liked math. I loved it quite a bit, and I was really good in history, and I was good in science. Now, I really loved history. I mean, I remember specifically just starting to become a senior in high school. My brother was already at the university, and he asked me one day, well, are you going to college? Are you going to university? Are you going to do that or not? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm going to go to get higher education. He says, well, what are you going to major in? And I said, I don't know. He says, well, what are you good at? So I said, well, I'm good at history and I'm good at math. And he said, pick one. And I said, okay, history. And he goes, history? What are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with that? Well, I know what I did with that in my career. I can now tell you. But I thought, okay, do I want to be a history teacher? Do I want to be a lawyer? What kind of degree could I do something with that? And so I then struggled with that a little bit, and then came the opportunity to use the 12-inch Alvin Clark refractor. Okay, so it's a long tube, 12-inch mirror or a 12-inch lens on the end of it, and I was hooked. A Star Trek was there. We're going to the moon. We talked astronomy. Man, it was all about science. And so when I left high school, I went to the University of Iowa. I knew exactly what I was going to be. I was going to go in and get a degree in astronomy and be an optical astronomer. Okay?
Well, it sounds like a very auspicious start, and I love that you were contributing in your formative years in high school. I mean, when you start,
yes.
It's one thing I love about doing this podcast is hearing people's stories as they find their way, and sometimes there's lots of twists and turns. But I can see this lifelong love of space for you that really persisted through all the phases of your life.
Yeah, as I got better in school, I could make decisions like that, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. So here I am, a freshman. I take Astronomy 101. Walk into the room with 450 other students at the University of Iowa, and James Van Allen is the teacher.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah. So Van was great. Unbelievable. Had a wonderful time. That first semester was wonderful. And then a second semester, Astronomy 201 was taught by somebody else. So I was taking that and I was putting my courses together, and I had a 2-hour gap that I could fill with something. Well, I went back into, since I'm going to be an astronomer, I'm signed up for an astronomy degree. I picked an astronomy course called Readings in Astronomy. Okay, Readings in Astronomy, taught by staff.
Okay.
Now, I didn't know at the time, but that means a graduate student's going to teach it. Okay, right?
Yeah.
And so I signed up for that and got the notice, here's the time, go to 701 Van Allen Hall, which is the top floor. So I go up, walk in 701, open the door, and it's a corner room. It's a huge corner room, but it looks like a storeroom. Okay, it looks like a storeroom. So there's tape racks everywhere. There's tables with printouts and card decks, because that's what you do when you interacted with computers using card decks. Okay, that's how old I am. And there's a bookcase that I'm standing next to in the entryway. Now I'm looking through this course cap. This can't possibly be the room. What the heck's going on? And so while I'm muttering to myself, Dr. Van Allen leans behind the bookcase and says, yes, Jim, this is the right room, and you're my only student.
Wow, even that's how many half a dozen lucky breaks in a row.
Well, I call those lucky breaks gravity assist, because those are the things, the events in your life that change your direction and propel you to a career.
Sure.
So my high school gravity assist was my chemistry teacher, who loved astronomy, got us involved in astronomy, and allowed us to do practical things with telescopes. And then my next one is Dr. Van Allen. So I told him all the stuff I did, all the astrophotography and the things that appeared in Sky and Telescope. And then I told him about my sun series. I had taken a picture of the sun, visible surface of the sun, on 35 millimeter slides, full frame, in a camera system and lens system that I had built and put together every day for 6 months without one day break.
Wow.
Okay.
This was back in high school.
This is back in high school.
Yeah.
Okay. And he goes, wow, we got to do something with that. Let's do some research. And I'm going, research? What's that? Okay.
Sure.
And so what I ended up doing was sunspot rotation. Measured, because this was at solar maximum. It's like 68 and 69, right in there. And so this solar maximum, I mean, like I had several sunspots groups that rotated around the sun 3 times, couple dozen that went around the sun a couple times, and then more than 3 or 4 dozen that crossed the sun that I can measure. And so I did that research. Now, what did Van Allen want me to do? He wanted me to write up that research like a scientific paper.
Sure.
It had a title, abstract, introduction, data analysis, how the data was taken, the data analysis, the key findings, summary and discussion, and then conclusions with references.
Well, and this is so reminiscent to me of the discovery of Pluto on those plates 30 years later.
Yeah. So this actually is real research done, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 years prior to when I did it. I mean, I did something that in the past years could have been the first ever.
Sure.
Sunspot rotation. You find out sunspots at the equator go around the sun faster than they do at higher latitudes. Okay, that's differential rotation. That's because the sun's not a solid body. And so, I could fit a curve to it. I did all the air analysis and everything, and he was the referee. Okay? And so at the end of that one semester, my second semester in college, the University of Iowa, I was hooked. And then I began to recognize that Van had brought so much of space research to Iowa. They were doing astronomy from spacecraft. Okay? And he was looking at magnetospheres. He was looking at high energy particles like cosmic rays. His first generation students were developing methods of looking at radio emissions from aurora. Not only our aurora on Earth, but Jupiter's aurora and other aurora on the other planets, and they got involved in the Voyagers. I mean, when I was there, Van was on like his 54th spacecraft, and they were building one called Hawkeye, which is the mascot for Iowa, is Herky the Hawk. But I then once again got my gravity assist from Van. I was absolutely hooked, and I decided I don't have to be an optical astronomer, getting up, sleeping all day, getting up and observing all night. I actually can do it from spacecraft in new and unique ways and get a good night's sleep. Why don't I do that? So I changed my advisor from an astronomer in the department, a wonderful scientist, John Neff, to one of Van Allen's top students, first-generation scientist Don Gurnett, who was an unbelievable mentor and my next gravity assist that propelled me into scientific research in many ways. So, and I learned an enormous amount from Don Gurnett. And so my career developed. Don would allow me as a student, he told me, he said, you can go anywhere in the world you want to and give a talk, but you got to give a talk on the research you're doing, whatever conference that is. I mean, if it's in Hawaii, go. If it's in Italy, go. I will fund that, but give a talk and go do that. So I averaged during my master's, which was 3 years to get my master's and 3 years to get my PhD, I averaged 3 talks a year, okay? And I'd written several papers, scientific papers with Don Gurnett and his team. And so by the time I got my degree, 1979, and I started at Iowa as a postdoc, I was really well known as a student. I had 5 job offers right away, right off the bat. And these offers were during a time when it was difficult to get jobs in a space-related field. I had actually 2 job offers from the Applied Physics Lab. I had another one from TRW, which if I had taken that one, that would have meant that I'd be doing research in sort of Department of Defense-related activities, and no one would know what the heck I ever did.
Sure.
And then I had one job offer at Goddard Space Flight Center and another job offer at Marshall Space Flight Center.
Wow.
So I took the one at Marshall Space Flight Center.
Okay.
Now, many scientists would say, well, why did you go to Marshall?
Right.
Goddard is the preeminent science
Right,
organization. And to me, it was obvious because Marshall was building a science group connected to Space Lab. They needed science advisors, science advice. They were starting to do science from the space shuttle, and they were building this group. And so I had a choice. I could be a small fish in a big pond, or I could be a big fish and contribute significantly to the work of that laboratory at Marshall Space Flight Center. And that's what I chose to do.
Now, I want to explore that a little bit more because you mentioned it was a hard time to find jobs in space science. And
early 80s.
And that kind of corresponds to something I've heard from a number of my guests, which is the downturn in the late 70s, early 80s of various non-shuttle activities within NASA. And you had shared with me earlier that you had a theory on that, and I'd love to hear that now that we've kind of reached that point in your career.
Well, I started at Marshall Space Flight Center in 1980. I wasn't a postdoc at Iowa, but for a handful of months. And I really dearly loved it. I was a civil servant immediately. And in that environment, I had great latitude to do all kinds of stuff. Okay, now it was a time also where the agency was undergoing, severe changes. In my 42 years as a civil servant, and yes, 42 is the answer, I've seen, rifts. I've seen downsizing. I've seen, changes in NASA, and it's always been resilient and overcome those things and moved on. But as a civil servant, I learned right away that as you see gaps in activities and you know how to fill them, fill them.
Okay.
And one of the gaps that I started in 1980 was that we had an instrument. The principal investigator of this instrument, Rick Chappell's the person that hired me at Marshall Space Flight Center, on an instrument called RIMS on Dynamics Explorer. And this was a new and wonderful instrument. So almost anything we did, and by looking at the data, we could publish. But he also had co-investigators at different locations. UT Dallas, University of Texas at Dallas, Utah State University, Stanford. So we had all these investigators were very far away. So how are we, where the flooded data is coming in, going to get them the information to participate in the analysis and be part of the research? Now, at this time, you have to recognize to communicate with another group, you picked up the phone, which was connected to the wall, all right, or you sent a fax or a telex, okay, and that was, or wrote a letter. That was it, all right? So at that time, I had been involved in all sorts of computer technologies at Iowa. I even worked in the physics department's computer room to supplement my income. I was a computer operator at Iowa. You would bring your card deck to that little slot, and on the other side of the slot was me. I would, and I was running 3 computers, doing all kinds of data analysis. And so I learned not to be afraid of computers and how to use computers to help do our job. And so I decided, hey, the best thing to do is figure out how to connect these disparate groups to Marshall. So I created NASA's first internet. It's called SPAN, and it exploded in the sense that we were bringing on nodes all over the place.
Wow. I can only
imagine. And so by the end of 1980, I was doing remote file transfer, remote log on. We were using computers to do messaging. I could look at another computer at Stanford, and here I am in Alabama. I could look at a computer at Stanford, see who's on it, and send them a message, and then we could communicate over text. We didn't have to call anybody. So when we wrote proposals, we would write stuff and send it to them, and we could get immediate response. It was just absolutely fantastic. And so the network as a resource exploded.
Sure.
Not only were we connecting research institutes all over the place, but since I was a civil servant, I could leverage and use NASA's communication infrastructure and build on it. And so that network was really wonderful. And we started using it for all kinds of stuff. I mean, I could spend, a long time talking about the stuff we did on this network.
Sure.
1985, I connected ESA. We went right into Darmstadt. Okay, I got NASA headquarters to pay for an international link, and they began connecting other universities into what they called E-SPAN, or European SPAN, and SPAN was an acronym that said Space Physics Analysis Network.
Okay.
And then in 87, I connected to JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency. And then 92, we were in Moscow. So all the four big agencies, NASA, ESA, ISAS, JAXA, Roscosmos, were all connected via the network I created. So in 82, we had thousands of scientists, using computer technologies.
Wow.
So Al Gore did not invent this network. I did.
Wow. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I could ask you questions about that for an hour, but I want to take a zoom out a little bit, and it sounded like this computer emphasis was perhaps part of the did it have anything to do with the lesser focus on science missions? Is that what you're getting at, or is that just a coincidence in time?
Yeah. So what was happening is I was hiring many people to help support the network, getting funding from NASA headquarters to continue to grow it and support it. That was great. And many of these guys and gals would learn the trade and then leave and then go establish their own companies and make millions of dollars. Okay. So many companies, internet companies, were coming off of learning what I was doing. So to me, I could have done that,
Sure.
I could have been a multi-millionaire right now running a computer company. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do scientific research, for which the network enabled me to do that.
Sure.
It gave me the opportunity to do more science, to connect with my science colleagues in a way where we could move the discoveries along and build on them. And it just was a tool to me.
Okay. But what was the reason you were getting at, though, for the downturn in the science missions?
Well, from my perspective, this helped connect users together to better utilize the data that we were getting.
Interesting.
So it was a way to rearrange how we do business to accommodate still huge scientific discoveries at a time when NASA was shrinking.
So you're saying that it was reducing the demand for new missions while increasing the actual output of science.
Well, I wouldn't say it's reducing the demand. Scientists always want more.
Yeah.
But if NASA can't,
I see. Okay.
pay for more
in the budget,
you got to better utilize what you're doing. I mean, right now, I would, when you look at what's the greatest science mission ever, based on the number of publications, it's Hubble. And Hubble has been working for several decades, but in that length of time, it has accumulated an archive for which more science is coming out of analysis of archival data from Hubble than the original observations that it's making today. All right. Wow. And that's because archival research is on the network, connected to anybody that wants to get on, start correlating these observations taken years ago with these observations just taken, making new inferences, bringing in different things, different wavelengths, and what they can do from archival research now has just not been thought of. Well, that's the same kind of thing, is the ability to really analyze the data in multidimensional ways, where one of the dimensions is not only bringing in new scientists that become knowledgeable about the data, but they bring with them other data sets for comparison. Now you're doing correlative science. It's not just we're looking at X to determine something. You're looking at X, Y, Z, and, everything else to determine the physics of what's
Right.
happening.
So
You know,
so it sounds like this, I can see, or at least I can imagine how this led to the chief scientist role, being so instrumental in this broad dissemination of information, connecting so many people. Is that a oversimplification, or how
yeah,
did
that's,
that come?
I would say not yet, but
Okay.
it laid a seed for that.
Okay.
Another one of the seeds were when I was at Marshall Space Flight Center. Actually, let me back up. When I was at the University of Iowa, my roommate was a scuba diver,
Okay.
and he got me into scuba diving. And while I was at Iowa, I ended up becoming the University of Iowa Scuba Club president.
Scuba diving being so heavily associated with Iowa in the
Yeah, so
global zeitgeist.
we dove rivers,
Okay.
quarries,
Wow.
lakes, visibility that's a matter of inches
Yeah.
sometimes, really crap stuff. And I was comfortable with that.
Wow.
If you're comfortable with diving and looking down and not seeing your anything below your knees, and you're okay with that,
Wow.
then you're going to be a good diver. So when I went to Marshall Space Flight Center, I found out about their neutral buoyancy tank. Okay, and this is where you practice EVAs, extravehicular activities, in human exploration. With astronauts doing stuff in space. And you practice those things in a water tank because you can, in that tank, really simulate a lot of the stuff that's going on in space. Because you can be in a spacesuit and you can orient yourself in any direction, and it nullifies an aspect of gravity in a really wonderful analog way.
I'm so glad you said an aspect, because it always seemed to me that what you cannot experience in a tank is the feeling of your organs not being pulled down, that like going over a hill or that. I always imagined that's a big shock when you get into space, no matter what, that continuous lack of sensation. But please
It is
continue.
a different sensation. But if you have to crawl outside of the International Space Station and translate down to an area and connect an instrument, you need to practice where your handholds are. You need to know how to connect that, and you need all the fidelity and practice that procedure before you go in space and do it for the first time. Okay. And the tank does that. Now, the tank doesn't do two things. One, it doesn't do the same thing in space to your inner ear. In other words, your inner ear tells you you're upside down because you are upside down, even though you're in water.
Right.
In space, it doesn't. Your fluid in your ear floats, and so your mind has to figure out what's up, what's down. All right. The second thing it is, if you're moving a structure because you're putting it together with something else, it doesn't do that very well because you have the resistance of the water. But there's aspects of it, because if a huge instrument is being bolted as a repair of Hubble, we practiced repair of Hubble like crazy. You get this huge spectrograph you're just putting into the Hubble. Well, we can make that neutral. You can move it around, and you can get the look and feel of what you have to do, what you have to look for, and slide it right in and then bolt it in and get it up and running. All that stuff you can do in the tank. So it gave me early on an appreciation for what human exploration is all about and how humans work in space. So not only have I got science and computer background, I now have human exploration background. I then got an opportunity to go to Goddard Space Flight Center and ended up managing the National Space Science Data. And then I managed the division that the National Space Science Data Center was in, and continually doing this kind of research and activity before I was asked to come to NASA headquarters and run planetary science in 2006.
So I think we maybe need to do a separate episode called Repairing Hubble, like a special or something.
We can.
I can only imagine the stories. There must be books on it. I haven't read one. Mike Massimino
Massimino,
excuse me, seems to get the public consciousness recognition, such as it is, for fixing Hubble. But of course, he's was
not the only one.
Sure, yeah, of course, and he was the most visible part, perhaps.
Yes,
of
he is. Yes,
very large team and process.
Right.
So maybe we should explore that. I would love to do that.
Well, this is an element of history.
Please.
We know a lot about history by the people that write it. If you don't write it, your stories aren't told. All right? So people like Jeff Hoffman and John Grunsfeld, I mean, people that that really worked on Hubble and making Hubble happen are minor characters today in history, when in reality, during that time period, they are critical in making that telescope work in the ways it does now and become, I think, the top instrument, the top mission that NASA's ever done.
Well, then maybe we should just do a whole episode called History of Hubble, because
we could.
I would love to get as much out of you and your memory as possible, particularly because I just did a disservice by focusing on Mike. So thank you for correcting me, and I'd love to get more of those stories, particularly as you said, it being such a productive instrument.
Yeah, it's a tremendously productive. Yep.
So you get to NASA headquarters.
Yes. 2006.
So I started at JPL early 2010. That's when I first heard your name. Now, you were still planetary science chief, right?
Right.
Okay,
yeah,
so that's when
I was I headed planetary till 2018.
2018.
12 years.
Okay.
There's no one that's held that position longer than I have. No one in the history of NASA.
So I'm curious how your perception of headquarters was compared to these other centers when you first got there.
Yeah.
Compared to the field centers.
I can easily tell you that, because when I was at the centers, everyone at headquarters were idiots. Okay. I mean, that was a general impression. Now, there's a reason for that. And the reason is, what happens is headquarters is the nerve center, is that central, it's like the center of the galaxy. That's where it's at.
Sure.
Why is that? Well, because it gets funds from Congress and distributes it to the centers. It also distributes the activities, through strategies. We're going to assign this mission to JPL. We're going to assign this mission to Goddard. That comes from headquarters. But headquarters also plans for the future. The future strategy and what we're going to do next and how we're going to do it starts at NASA headquarters.
So that was one of my favorite things about my JPL experiences, my bizarre story there. I got to see that from a very early stage in my career. And I came to the conclusion very quickly, actually, that the administrator of NASA, and please correct me if you disagree with this, has actually relatively limited amount of power, at least compared to what I certainly assumed, having to satisfy enormous constituencies above and below, none of whose priorities aligned with what one might imagine for the person in charge of NASA.
Yeah, that's a good thought, but let me give you a better perspective. That individual is a political appointee. So that individual is already aligned with the administration. Okay,
fair. Yeah.
All right. So that individual knows what it's got to do and help NASA to meet those objectives that the administration has laid out. Now, working under that administrator, I need that person desperately. Okay. And the reason why is the head of a division, a science division like planetary science, has two types of missions. One are principal investigator missions. So we put out a call. If you got an idea for a mission and you want to be the PI and we think you can do it, we'll fund it, okay? But that mission has got to follow certain strategies, like those things that are coming out of the National Academy that are in the planetary decadal, that we call them decadal studies, all right? There's certain things we need done, and if you think you can do it, propose it, we select you, you go do it, and you got our support. I'm going to make sure you get your money. I'm going to make sure you get it on time. I'm going to make sure, I remove the barriers necessary for you to make your mission and meet your planetary window. That's one type of mission. The other missions are strategic missions. There's no PI for that. The person responsible for a strategic mission is the division director. Okay? Now, who is that? Well, what missions are there? That's Curiosity. I was responsible for it. Okay. If Curiosity crashed on Mars, I would be fired. Not Charles Lacci, the head of JPL.
Sure.
Not Fuke Lee, the head of the Mars Exploration Group. Me, Jim Green, because I am held accountable for that mission.
Sure.
So Curiosity is a strategic mission. Perseverance is a strategic mission.
Yeah.
DART is a strategic mission.
Clipper
is a strategic mission. CLIPS are a strategic mission. So those are my 5 new starts that I made happen that I was responsible for. I mean, when I was doing Curiosity, my boss at the time was Ed Weiler.
Mm.
And what I was doing, as you probably remember, is we were promoting it a lot. I mean, to the point where we were going to broadcast live out of mission control while we're landing the mission. Okay. Now,
I remember that night very well.
Yeah. You know where you were when we landed Curiosity.
And my then 3-year-old son was there too. So I really
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry,
my son was there too.
3-month-old, 3-month, not 3-year.
Yeah, Scott was in his in high school during that time.
Wow.
No, he wasn't. He was already out. But the bottom line is, if that mission crashed, I'd be fired. All right? I'm totally responsible for that. All right?
And they'd send you the bill.
Yeah, well, I'd be gone because I don't know how to manage my missions. But when we were building Curiosity, this is my first strategic mission. We were building Curiosity. We got to the point where we knew we weren't going to make the launch window in 2009. All right. Okay. And so we had to slip it 26 months. Now that screwed up the schedule and it screwed up the funding. Who do you think got blamed for that? Me. I had to go to Congress and ask them for an additional $495 million to close that 26-month gap.
Yeah.
Think about it. I'm responsible for that.
And you had just started in that role in 08? Did I hear that? Or 06?
06. I was well into it. Into it.
That's enough time that it's on you, isn't it?
It's always on the division director, no matter what. Okay. Sure. So that's my mission. I had to make it go. And so I got the money and off we go. But the bottom line to that is I learned something very important. I learned that we should not be building missions, even strategic missions, and expecting to do 10 miracles. All right. 1 miracle a mission, please.
Sure. So that would be the sky crane, presumably.
Well, yeah, which is the element of landing a 1.2 metric ton rover. When prior to that we were landing, a tenth of that, or a fifth or so. The Spirit and Opportunity were 178 kilograms, not 1.2 metric ton.
Yeah. Well, so one of the highlights for me of my first 2.5 years at JPL, which is before the landing, was trying to understand everything going on, learning everything I could possibly learn, but also come to understand the Curiosity project, despite the fact that none of the people working on it I ever saw. They were always busy. I don't know when they ate lunch. And so it really taught me how to dig around JPL, almost literally, and learn what I wanted to learn. So I don't want to rush the next part of this part of your career. I think this is a natural point to end this episode.
Okay.
I think that we can go from here to the chief scientist role and your future and your current activities in another episode. But to conclude part 1, why don't you tell us about your recent books that are out, particularly, and that maybe can keep people interested and coming back for part 2.
Well, in 2018, I transitioned from, I was asked to be the NASA chief scientist, for which I said yes. And then I held that until 2022. And it was during that time period that Taschen, which is a fabulous publisher, and the heart of their books are really all about art or aspects of art, the beauty of our environment. I mean, they do beautiful libraries around the world, not just the lives of the painters like Michelangelo or Titian, etc., but really fabulous art books. And they had called NASA and they wanted to do, because they were becoming really excited about the images from Mars, Mars images as art. And so NASA, the Office of Communication, Bert Ulrich, who ran that particular organization that interacts with the film media and everything else, said, "Okay, I'll get you somebody." And he called me up immediately. He said, "Jim, would you like to get involved in a book helping Taschen pull it together about Mars?" And I said, "You bet." And so starting in 2019 or so, I began working with them, talking to them, talked to their first editor on the book, what they wanted, what they were looking at, talking about, well, we need some good science things that are in it, chapters. We need great images. Here's where we're going to get images. I got a better feeling for what they wanted. I sort of outlined a couple ideas, and off we went. And the result of that is this book. It's called Mars: Photographs from the NASA Archive, and it's
Wow.
it's a fabulous book with beautiful images, but it's got some fabulous chapters in it.
Okay.
I wrote the chapter on the search for life at Mars. Rob Manning wrote the chapter on how to land on Mars. Margaret Whitcamp wrote the chapter on how did it lead up that Mars is important in our science and culture. What's the history of Mars? And so it's a beautiful little book, and it's very popular. So
Yeah, well, I
that's
want
one
it.
thing. Now, the other part of me, as I mentioned, is I love history. History and science are perfect things for me because I enjoy them both almost equally. And so therefore, my job during the day is science. So I'll work 12 hours a day at NASA. I come home. Now, if I bring work with me home and I work on it and then go to bed, what happens is I dream about it. All right.
Yeah.
And so I get up in the morning and it's like, Jesus, I just spent another 8 hours at work.
Yeah.
What was I thinking? All right. If I read history, it's a huge break. It gives me a new perspective. I can dream about history all I want.
Sure.
And when I wake up in the morning, I feel like I'm ready to go to work. I got some great ideas. I'm energized, and I can do another 12 hours of science. So those two have been very complementary, okay, for me to be able to handle the stress of the job. You know, as I mentioned during the time I was planetary for 12 years, the average is 2.8 years, the average, all right? And that's because it's a high-pressure job. I know exactly why. The demands are enormous. The responsibilities are enormous, and it can eat you up. All right. And so what helped me not get eaten up and overtaken by events is getting this kind of break, thinking about something else completely different. And so I love history of all types, but in particular, Civil War history. Now, the reason why is when I was 12 years old, my grandmother, one day gave me a book. Actually, I think it was my birthday, gave me a beautiful book, a picture book of the Civil War by Bruce Catton, and said her father, my great-grandfather, was in the Civil War. And I'm going, wow, really? Okay. I mean, he was alive. Actually, he had passed away when I was born, but those generations were closely overlapping.
Yeah.
So I really got excited about the Civil War. And as I started reading everything I could get my hands on the Civil War, I ran across, just so happens, that the Civil War had aeronautics. They had balloons. What? Balloons? Really?
Yeah.
And so I began a process of digging out, going to the National Archive on the weekends, going to the Library of Congress, going to the Air and Space Museum, working with Tom Crouch, the head of the aeronautics department at the Air and Space Museum, and bringing together information about Civil War balloons. And in fact, right now, I've outlined a book that I want to do in that area. I've got so much information, and they're absolutely, unbelievably fantastic what they use these balloons for. And I had an opportunity.
Want to stop you, but I think that is actually a natural point to lead into our next episode sometime very soon.
All right.
Civil War ballooning, landing rovers on Mars, and telescopes in Iowa. I think these are wonderful themes. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that you've also made history in landing Curiosity on Mars.
True.
As part of that team. So I think we're going to end this part. For sure, we're going to do a part 2.
All right.
If you have the other book in your hand, I'm happy.
I do. I have it in my hand.
Let's see it.
So most recently, I wrote a chapter for a book, and here it is, on Civil War balloons. It's how we use Civil War balloons for gathering military intelligence. And this came from a history conference that I presented at, and that history conference was supported by the Spy Museum. here
See
in
that?
Washington, D.C.
That, we got to call it right there. That's an amazing sentence. Civil War balloons, Civil War hot air balloon reconnaissance by the Spy Museum.
They were not hot air.
So then we'll have to start part 2 with that and what they
Yeah,
were.
that's a misconception.
Interesting.
Really big difference.
Well, I'm going to write that down to make sure we start with that, and then we'll continue going from planetary head to chief scientist.
All right.
And I look forward to talking more about all of this in the greater historical context. So thank you again for joining me.
You're very welcome, Jeff.
And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Space Madness podcast.
Thank you.